Look at the screen on the left. High-speed, high-resolution digital data streaming instantly to a pocket-sized piece of glass. On the right, a century-old mechanical projection, sputtering along at 16 frames per second. We often call cinema the seventh art, a medium that integrates narrative from literature, physical performance from theater, and composition from photography, wrapping it all in a bed of music. But a painter only needs a brush, and a writer only needs a pen. Cinema is an art form defined by its engineering. The artistic capability of any given filmmaker is strictly dictated by the technological limits of their camera, their film stock, and their projection booth. That modern, on-demand 4K stream you watch today is the result of a 130-year sequence of mechanical and digital breakthroughs. To map how we got here, we have to look closely at the specific engineering leaps that allowed the moving image to scale: the integration of synchronized sound, the chemical mastery of three-strip color, and the logistical triumph of satellite distribution. Understanding the history of film means recognizing a simple feedback loop. Every time an engineer invented a new piece of technology, directors were forced to invent an entirely new language of storytelling to use it. At its most basic structural level, the cinematic frame is an illuminated rectangle in a dark room. It is a blank canvas waiting to be filled. In the late 19th century, filling that canvas with motion was treated strictly as a scientific novelty. Thomas Edison and his team built this machine, the kinetoscope, between 1889 and 1893. It successfully displayed moving images, but its architecture had a severe physical limitation. The viewer had to peer into a wooden cabinet. Only one person could watch it at a time. In 1895, two French inventors, Auguste and Louis Lumière, solved the scale problem. They managed to project a moving image outward onto a wall, allowing a massive public audience to experience the exact same visual data simultaneously. They achieved this using the cinematograph. This single piece of brass and wood captured, printed, and projected the film. The Lumières used it to capture single-shot documentaries of everyday life, treating the machine as an objective observer of the real world. Georges Méliès was a professional stage magician in Paris who recognized a different application for the hardware. When he acquired a camera, he quickly realized that the film strip could be physically manipulated to break the laws of physics. By winding the film back and shooting over the same strip a second time, a technique called multiple exposure, he could make actors disappear, conjure ghosts, and send ships to the moon. The silent era proved that a camera could manufacture a subjective, immersive reality, rather than simply documenting an objective one. As camera mechanics stabilized in the early 20th century, directors stopped relying on the novelty of motion and started building complex, character-driven narratives. Charlie Chaplin became one of the first truly global icons by recognizing the exact constraints of the format. Because there was no audio, Chaplin engineered his tramp persona to rely on precise physical geometry. Every joke, emotion, and plot point in films like The Gold Rush and City Lights had to be communicated through silhouette, pacing, and gesture. 3 decades later, in the 1940s, an actor and director named Orson Welles began treating the camera's lens as an active participant in the story. In his 1941 debut, Citizen Kane, Welles and his cinematographer Toland heavily utilized a technique called deep focus. Deep focus requires closing the aperture and flooding the set with light. This massive depth of field keeps foreground objects and background characters perfectly sharp simultaneously. Welles used this spatial depth to stage multiple pieces of narrative information in a single, unbroken shot. Through the lens and the actor's body, directors gained precise control over the viewer's eye, establishing the first formal techniques of cinematic focus. But the silent, monochromatic frame eventually hit a ceiling. To push audience engagement further, engineers had to figure out how to attach synchronized sound and a full color spectrum to a fast-moving strip of celluloid. The transition began in the late 1920s as studios navigated the massive logistical and financial risks of integrating synchronized audio into the production workflow. Warner Bros. Broke the dam in 1927 with The Jazz Singer, featuring spoken dialogue. Its massive commercial success proved audiences desperately wanted audio. The film utilized the Vitaphone system. Instead of printing sound directly on the film, audio played off a separate synchronized disc. This forced a temporary regression. Heavy microphones were hidden in stationary props, forcing actors to stand perfectly still, restricting camera movements. Despite the initial awkwardness, sound quickly conquered the globe. In 1931, director Ardeshir Irani released Alam Ara, India's first talkie. By fusing dialogue with synchronized music, the film birthed the rich musical genre that defines Indian cinema to this day. With the audio problem solved, the industry chased natural color. Early directors like Méliès hired workers to physically paint every single frame of a film by hand, a process that was slow and highly inaccurate. The permanent solution arrived in the 1930s with the three-strip Technicolor process. A Technicolor camera was an intricate optical engineering feat. Light struck an internal prism, splitting the image into three separate film strips filtered for red, green, or blue light. During processing, these strips were dyed and glued together into a single, vibrant print. By 1939, movies had expanded from a silent, monochromatic medium into a multi-sensory experience that mimicked the complexity of human sight and sound. For 60 years, the core medium remained the same: heavy celluloid strips wound around metal reels. Physical film had severe logistical friction. Chemicals degrade, and movies required multiple heavy canisters. To show a film globally, studios shipped thousands of miles of plastic across continents. The bottleneck broke in the late 20th century as analog reels were converted into digital data, popularized for consumers by the DVD format. Once a movie was just a computer file, companies realized you didn't need to ship physical prints at all. You could beam the encrypted file directly to a satellite, which would bounce it down to a digital receiver on the theater's roof. This erased the physical friction of distribution. It allowed independent theaters in remote regions to exhibit films the moment they were released, enabling simultaneous global premieres. In the early 2000s, platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime Video recognized that digital files could be pushed even further down the chain. By utilizing expanding global internet infrastructure, over-the-top, or OTT, streaming bypassed the physical theater entirely. They built massive server farms capable of delivering thousands of high-definition films directly to personal screens on demand. The shift from celluloid reels to satellite packets stripped away the final physical barrier. Accessibility was no longer controlled by the theater owner. It was placed directly in the hands of the audience. This doesn't mean the theater is obsolete. To compete with the convenience of smartphones, modern cinemas simply leveraged new engineering to offer premium scale, incorporating large-format IMAX projection and polarized 3D rendering. The timeline is immense. In just over a century, we moved from hand-cranked wooden boxes in Parisian cafes to a continuous network of satellites beaming 4K data into our pockets. But the equation of cinema remains constant. Every piece of hardware, from multiple exposure lenses to synchronized audio discs to three-strip prisms, was rapidly adopted because it gave a storyteller a more precise tool to manipulate human emotion. The technology is infinitely more complex, but the core objective of a modern director is exactly the same as the Lumiere brothers in 1895. Ultimately, cinema remains a singular engineering feat: the use of light, sound, and digital packets to simulate a cohesive human experience.